Hi there, gang. Welcome back to the Tavern. Our Abhaile campaign is taking a much-needed week off tonight, but as they say, the show must go on. Tonight, we've got a special installment for you all. A little peek behind the curtain to the travels and tribulations of a couple individuals making their own way across this vast, vast world. First things first, though, we do want to extend a huge thanks to Impassible Creations, makers of beautiful, comfy, cozy dice bags, scrunchies, and pillows to ensure that you and your dice are nice, warm, and safe, while those same dice try to murder you. They also have these super awesome reusable initiative trackers, and if you're a masochist, they have initiative trackers that go all the way up to 30. So no matter the encounter, they have you covered. Although at that point you do have to ask yourself, do you even like your party? Head on over to impassiblecreations.com to check out their whole collection. Second, a huge thanks to Ellie over at DeviantArt at Pearl Area. She hooked us up with the awesome art for George, our new Shelkin friend, and is working her butt off making some awesome art scenes for the campaign. You can find her link in the description below. And on the topic of art, if you're an aspiring fan artist and you'd like to share your vision for scenes that happened in the game, send those over. We'll display them proudly on our shows, and link your socials in return. We have an email address for that in the description below. Without any further ado, let's get into it. I've got Kat here with me tonight. We're excited to share these stories with you all. Let's dive in. The sun finally broke around the peaks. Hours into the morning, light spilled down into the coastal lowlands, past the trees, finally resting across the massive, miles-wide, roiling mass of the Jejun horde. Impressive from a distance, daunting even, but to Sunder, it was a complex deception. At night, the elders looked to the stars. They looked for guidance, for direction. By day, the horde followed, and far to the south, across the great water, Sunder could just see the faint, smoldering peak of Shintath. And again, he was reminded of this great ploy. The elders claimed that they followed the stars, but they never tread so far as to lose sight of their namesake. His little workshop was set up on the fringes of the great moving tent city. Little more than a wagon with a 2-horse hitch. The artisans load the horde with their carts, but without them, there would be no horde. Their trades armed and outfitted the scouts, who rode ahead. Their goods supplied the warriors that protected the young and the infirm. It was, admittedly, a beautiful cohesion to Sunder. It was also their greatest failing. Rather than adapting, the Shintathi allowed the land to dictate their lives. A great irony from those who allegedly followed the stars. Instead of building homes to shelter his people, well, he made arrows. Sedentarism was a new concept to the Shintathi, and for Sunder knew, perhaps just limited to the Jejun. He was only a few small minority who shared these ideals. They yearned for a permanent home. If anyone was to blame for this division, it was the mountain dwellers. Great keeps carved into the stone, their people protected, of course. They hunted, scouted, but their cities never moved. They always had a home to return to. If a Shintathi strayed too far for too long, all they could hope to return to would be nothing. Ruts carved into the earth, flattened fields of grass, felled trees, and cold fire pits as the horde moved on. The Fireborn laughed. The elders mocked the budding minority. And so, Sunder made arrows. In his cramped wagon workbench before him, sharp blue eyes brimmed with focus. Before him, a symphony ready to be written. Taking hold of a stack of slender ashwood shafts, Sunder's dexterous fingers danced across their smooth surface, inspecting each one with a discerning gaze. Selecting just the finest specimen, he meticulously measured their length, carefully trimmed their ends to ensure uniformity. With a seasoned touch, he smoothed the edges, erasing any blemishes that dared to mar the elegance of the arrows. As the morning sun filtered through the open sides of the wagon, casting a warm glow upon the scene, Sunder turned his attention to the arrowheads. He reached for a collection of obsidian shards, glimmering like starlight, each one delicately chiseled to a lethal point. Gently pressing the obsidian against a smooth stone, he expertly honed the edges to a razor-sharp perfection. Sunder then affixed them to the shafts, taking thin strands of the finest sinew. He deftly wrapped it around the base of each obsidian point, securing it tightly to the wood. His hands moved with practiced grace, leaving an intricate harmony of strength and beauty. With his arrowheads ready, Sunder's focus shifted to the delicate task of fletching. He reached for a bundle of falcon feathers, each one plucked with care and reverence. Cradling the feathers in his hands, he admired the iridescent beauty, a testament to the noble creatures from which they came. Using a small, razor-sharp knife, Sunder deftly trimmed the quills of the feathers, leaving just the perfect length. With practiced precision, he carefully affixed 3 feathers to each arrow shaft, arranging them equidistant from one another. Employing a mixture of natural resins and fine sinew, he secured the feathers in place, ensuring that they would endure even the most violent of flights. To complete the arrows, Sunder adorned them with intricate engravings, etched ancient elven symbols into the wooden shafts. Each stroke of his slender knife seemed to breathe life into the arrows, infusing them with the spirit of the forest from which they were born. Time seemed to bend to Sunder's will as he worked, his movements fluid and precise. The once bare workbench now overflowed with a sea of arrows, an army of lethal precision. His craft, a testament to his heritage and dedication, was a symphony of artistry and purpose. But it wasn't enough.
Hundreds of miles to the southeast, nestled against a great salty lake, deep in a hot and humid forest, smoke drifted into the night sky from clay chimneys and thatched roofs. There, while most partisans slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares, Jolyn Mudpaw dreamed of paradise. There, on her modest cot, in her modest hut, while others twisted and turned, she dreamed of waves, hot bathwater, lapping at tree-lined shores in a quiet bay, drowned in sunlight. Paradise, far from the darkness that hides in the shadows. Her people, the partisan tribe, originally came together at the foot of the mountain. You might call it the northern part of a formation known as the Five Watchers, on the western banks of that great lake. They were peaceful, primitive people, tall, strong-boned, with skin in shades of green. Communal societies of farmers and trappers sprung up in the shadows of the Watchers. This was before Jolyn began dreaming of paradise, before the darkness came from those mountains. It leached out from fissures and crags, corrupting the spirit of the land and those unfortunate enough to venture too closely. Color drained from their skin and their bodies distorted, growing gigantic, strong, and evil. They weren't just angry or violent. The corrupted giants hunted the partisans, driving them from their homes. As any sane people would, they fled. South and east they ran until they came to the shores of the lake. South again, away from the Watchers. Still, the giants hunted, killed. So many died in those first panic-stricken days. Many more fell victim to the harsh realities of the forest. More still as they crossed the great river. That had been just 3 days past, and for the first time in months, they weren't hunted. The giants refused to cross behind them. They were, in some terms, safe. That was the first night that Jolyn dreamt of paradise. It would not be the last. She knew where to take her people.
Sunder watched from his wagon as the massive ball of fire sank beneath the waves, leaving behind a purple blur in his icy blue eyes and a ghostly green flash streaking up from where the sun vanished. Around him, the sounds of activity as thousands began building cook fires. Conversation sprang up and scouts returned to camp. It was always an airy form of quiet in the daytime as folks focused on their works. At night, the horde came to life, as did the stars above. He looked over at his day's work. His arrows were some of the most coveted in all of the hordes. They didn't break, they flew true, they cut deep. He was proud of his work, but in his heart, he yearned to build something more substantial, something more. The Fireborn laughed at him when he suggested they put down roots. It had cut deeper than one of his arrows ever could. The Shantathi followed the Fireborn, Genasi born on the slopes of the great flaming mountain, blessed by the fire itself. The same fire that burns at the heart of all stars. Sunder knew the truth, though. He saw what their glowing, burning eyes would never see. All men yearn for a home. They were unwittingly slaves to this truth already, never leaving sight of their mountain. A different mountain had shown Sunder the world in an instant, twisted his mind with possibility. These dwarves had knowledge he desired, strong walls, hidden well from passers-by. If he was going to build a home, he needed to learn from them. With nothing but his flute and the furs and leathers on his back, Sunder set out, leaving behind his wagon and his arrows. It was no great task to slip away from the camp. Most everyone was settling down for dinner and a good night's rest. They had no need for guards or sentries. Anyone brave enough to challenge the camp from any angle would be met with swift resistance, even from a child. Quietly, he slipped into the woods and up the slopes towards the mountain. He had no idea if the dwarves relied on sentries or guards. However, so he crept from tree to tree, moving with the unearthly grace of an elf. His blue eyes cut the night, allowing him to skirt around branches or dried leaves threatening to reveal his position. This would have been less difficult if his barbaric tribe hadn't attacked the dwarves at first sight. Thankfully, Sunder was a little more than just an arrow maker. As he bounded silently between a pair of trees, a subtle bit of magic sprung up from his soul, changing his body to look like one of the dwarves the others had killed. With the same care he put into crafting a deadly arrow, he recreated the man's appearance. His long hair became shorter, frazzled, with a beard on his chin. His face lost its sharp lines and filled out, rounder and wider. His arms and legs grew thick, muscled, shorter. Satisfied with his supernatural disguise, Sunder left the safety of the forest, finding a well-traveled path. He followed. As the final touches of his spell took form, a wound on the side of his head appeared, dried blood around matted hair. He staggered a bit as he walked, weaving from one side of the path to the other. Unsteadily, he approached the massive stone gate. Ahead of him, concealed in the shadows, he heard whispers. His ears may have appeared dwarven, but they functioned like an elf's. Even concealed, he could hear their alien tongues. "Oh there," he called out, matching their dialects perfectly. He continued a few steps, falling to one knee. The moment Sunder heard boots running on stone, he collapsed fully into feigned unconsciousness. They quickly gathered him up and carried him inside the safety of their mountain. They set him down on a soft bed somewhere before retreating to find help. Knowing his magic wouldn't maintain itself for terribly long, he had no choice. wherever they had gone, they would not find him when they returned. Off into the darkness, Sunder made his escape, changing his disguise to represent no specific dwarf, just his own interpretation. He kept the beard and brought the hair in short on the sides, longer on the top and back, the way he kept his. He made his way through twisting tunnels until the path opened before him to reveal a grand chamber. Looking at the stone sides, it had been carved from the mountain itself. Sunder was amazed. The time and effort required, it was simply staggering. Buildings, like stone tents, were built from the walls, and cook fires lit the insides. Hundreds of them occupied the space. It was more than he could have ever imagined. And unless you were looking, you would never find it. He found one building that appeared to be a common house of some sort. He could hear raucous conversation from a great deal off, as people sang and carried on, firelight spilling out the windows and open door. He had no idea what these people used for trade and barter. The Shintathi did not have money. He did have a flute. And while there was singing, there was no music. So he improvised, taking a moment to appreciate the melody before stepping into the common house. The whole room instantly went still, quiet, as all eyes trained on the newcomer. Before anyone could say a word, though, he pressed his flute to his lips and blew, continuing the song from his approximation of where they left off. Drinks were raised, shouts ensued, and the singing continued again. For the first time, maybe ever, a Shintathi slept with stone, not stars, overhead. On his third day in the dark, doubt crept in. Sunder had never journeyed so far afield from his brothers and sisters in the Horde. Deep underground, in the warrens and tunnels of a people almost completely alien to him, he began to doubt. Doubt was interesting. It was irrational. It was uncaring. He could go back. Almost certainly, without question, he would be able to return and continue to make his arrows. But he realized the irrationality, the intrusiveness of the thoughts. Doubt was the easy path back to safety and starlight. He'd struck out to find a home, and it took no longer than reaching the gates of Daruden. He had quickly learned that was the dwarves' name for their subterranean city that he had infiltrated, to realize that he'd been lying to himself, at least a little. But he was starting to put the pieces of revelation together. In simpler terms, home worked, but back in the Horde, Sunder crafted fine arrows. His greatest craft, however, his greatest arrow, was his own curiosity. He'd seen something in the dwarves that he'd never encountered, and he had to know more. Plumb the secret waters of the unknown. Pull back, string to cheek, let loose. The arrow of his mind found its home in the grand stone doors. It pulled back and fired again, sending him further, deeper into the dark. The underground world of Daruden was massive, but not infinite. The mountain seemed to have been once fiery peaks, much like his own Shuntath, but now cool and dormant. The dwarves capitalized on the chutes, tunnels, and pipes that scattered like webs in a shattered clay brick. Pushing out into these seldom used warrens, he first heard the voices. Whispers, really. Alien. Unknown. But ever present in a seldom used warren in his mind. He couldn't understand the strange rhythmic patterns, but they urged him on, deeper, further. His curiosity sustained him, as he left his assumed dwarven forms behind, searching through unmarked corridors crafted by nature herself. On the 9th day, or what he presumed was the 9th day, time was a long-lost friend when he lived in darkness. Signs of life. The tunnels began reaching upward, the warmth from the rock meeting resistance from above. The natural formations of magma tubes gave way into something more, intent and tool, crafted sturdy tunnels, reinforced with strong hard wood. Homes began to show themselves among the rock. In the crags, the architecture was similar to what he'd observed in Darudin, but different in ways. More stoic, heavy lines, where earlier he'd recorded more smooth curves, chiseled with care from stone to demonstrate the artistry. These abodes had a utilitarian, if not respectful, appearance to them, as if the stone was coaxed where needed, to provide a secure, safe front, while allowing the rock to dictate many aspects of the design as well. It was a seamless integration of brutalism and the natural erosion of time. As he had done many times before over the past several days, he began to weave the magic around him, preparing to alter his form into one of the dwarves he had occupied, hoping to slip in and assimilate. But he took pause. From a hidden vantage point, he took note of a commotion. He could hear voices, a great many voices. Excitement and perhaps a little trepidation filled the air. Rather than risk his disguise on ignorance, he changed his tact. The last thing he wanted was to stumble upon a celebration or gathering his dwarf form should have knowledge of, letting his ignorance betray his disguise. A silver tongue could only get you so far, and he had no desire to fight his way out, especially when out was an unknown variable in this land beneath. The whispers returned, as shadows instead surrounded his tall elven form. Twisting and coalescing, they crept up his skin like veins of black, expanding and covering him until he completely vanished from sight. Protected from detection, wrapped in the cold embrace of his dark magic, he stepped from the shadows, noticing for the first time what his ears had indicated. Groups of dwarves were gathering. It was nothing compared to the scale of the horde, but impressive all the same. They were quickly making their way up.
Ever curious, Thunder found himself in step with the family, carefully staying back enough to not be jostled or bumped. They spoke with reverence towards an Earth Mother, how she had blessed them with visitors. As they walked, he clocked the same excitement from others that joined the group. Strangers had come, bringing gifts to trade. Ahead, the tunnel grew lighter, and as the massive doors rounded a bend, Sunder nearly collided with a stout man with thick brown braids down to his mid-back, as the light of day overwhelmed his keen, sharp eyes for the first time in over a week. The tunnel constricted nearing the surface. As a blast of cool air hit his face, he pressed his back up against the stone walls, allowing the dwarves to pass. In these tighter confines, he couldn't risk walking openly among them, concealed or not. As the crowd pushed out, the tunnel emptied once more. Once he felt it safe, he followed, slowly. At the mouth, he was forced to raise his hand to shield his eyes from the intensity that was the burning ball in the sky. He felt foolish, as the invisible hand offered no respite. It took a moment for his eyes to acclimate, and still he was left with a deafening purple semi-transparent mass obscuring his vision. It began to fade as the excitement he'd heard below was dwarfed by the commotion here on the surface. Hundreds of dwarves had emerged, and he was shocked to see them intermingling with a large number of elves, and beings that looked similar enough to elves, without the sharp, distinct features of his kin. Taking stock of his surroundings, he was met with another surprise. He was situated at the base of a great mountain, much like where he'd entered the world beneath, but the land here was different, colder, new scents on the breeze. Looking back over his shoulder, his vision was completely obscured by a great stone range. The whispers told him what he knew to be true. Simtath would never be visible in this land, that comforting glow on the horizon. The desperate groups intertwined, sharing drinks and cooked fires, stories and pleasantries. These familiar folk looked much like Sunder, but they wore strange clothing. There was care and design put into the garments, which stood out compared to the functional but mismatched collection of leathers and furs that he wore. A plan began to form as he made his way carefully out of the throng of people, heading away from the camp. He found a tall bow and quiver near the outskirts, neglected by its owner as they drank dark brew from large containers. The quiver vanished as he fastened it to his belt. The bow did the same as he deftly palmed it, idly testing the weight and balance in his hands. The sun was lower in the sky when Sunder returned to the camp. The shadows had left him, and he strode the land with purpose. His magics adjusted his clothes to fit with the ones he'd seen earlier. It was a temporary solution, but one he hoped could be remedied soon. He approached the nearest cook fire, 3 rabbits in hand. The small gift of a hot meal made one a part of many, as these things go. When the Boralians set out, Sunder happily followed suit. They traveled for days along the river, further and further south. It would have reminded him of the Ford, if not for the palpable excitement shared by all. They were returning home. He couldn't help but share their excitement, if not for different reasons. Most importantly, after an impossible journey, a day north of Vestergaard, Sunder Arrowmaker slept comfortably beneath the stars once more.